They had trained in the same kitchen, competed for the same awards, and built their restaurants on the same street. For 10 years, Margot and Julian had never spoken a civil word. Then a saboteur destroyed both their supply chains the night before the biggest charity dinner of the year, and the only kitchen left was the one they would have to share. Margot Laurent never raised her voice in the kitchen, and that was exactly why everyone listened. Orders moved through L'Heritage like precise cuts of a blade, clean, deliberate, unquestioned. Sauces reduced to the second, plates aligned to the millimeter, timing calculated like a quiet obsession. Discipline was not a rule here, it was the air. She stood at the center of it, sleeves rolled, expression calm, eyes sharp enough to catch a mistake before it existed. Table 7, refire, she said, not loudly, but the entire line adjusted instantly. No hesitation, no discussion. For Margot, cooking was not performance. It was preservation. Every dish carried weight, techniques passed down, traditions refined, history protected from dilution. L'Heritage wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement that precision still mattered, that restraint still had power. For years, that was enough. Until the noise started. At first, it was subtle. Construction across the street, the kind you ignore until it becomes impossible to. Then came the lights. Neon, aggressive, pulsing long after midnight. And finally, the name appeared, impossible to miss, the neon table. Margot noticed it once. Then she stopped looking. New place opening. Her sous chef mentioned one morning, casual, almost careless, not relevant. Margot replied without lifting her gaze from the plating in front of her. But it was. She knew at the moment the first review appeared online before the doors even officially opened. The kind of attention that didn't wait to be earned. The kind that was built to overwhelm. Opening night arrived like a challenge thrown directly at her door. The street, usually quiet after sunset, shifted. Music carried across the pavement, low but constant. People gathered outside the neon-lit entrance, drawn by something loud, something new, something that promised not refinement, but experience. Margot didn't step outside. She didn't need to. She could feel it in the rhythm of her own dining room. Reservations still full, but different. Guests distracted. Conversations drifting toward the windows. Curiosity pulling attention away plate by plate. Then it happened. A couple at table 3 asked to cancel their dessert. Not because anything was wrong. Because they had another reservation. Across the street. Margot nodded once. Of course. No reaction. No visible crack. But inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. Because she already knew who was behind it. Julian Vance didn't believe in quiet kitchens. He believed in impact. Inside the neon table, nothing stayed still for long. Flames rose higher than necessary. Music synced with movement. Dishes assembled like controlled chaos. Unexpected, theatrical, deliberate in their unpredictability. Where Margot built control, Julian built momentum. He moved through the space like he owned every second of it, greeting guests, adjusting plates, rewriting decisions mid-service without hesitation. Risk wasn't a factor. It was the foundation. Push the contrast more, he told one of his chefs, tasting a sauce and immediately discarding it. If it's safe, it's forgettable. He didn't need to look across the street to know she was there. Margot Laurent, the only person who had ever matched him, step for step, when it mattered. Culinary school hadn't been a competition officially, but between them, it never stopped being one. She was precision. He was instinct. She refined. He disrupted. And every evaluation, every challenge, every silent comparison ended the same way, undecided. No winner. No closure. Until now. Service is peaking, someone called out. Julian smiled, just slightly. Good. Let it. Back at L'Heritage, Margot adjusted a plate that didn't need adjusting. A detail so small no one else would notice. Chef, her sous chef asked carefully. She straightened. We maintained standard. That was all. No reaction to the chaos outside. No acknowledgement of the shift. But when the service finally slowed, when the last plate left the pass and the kitchen exhaled, she allowed herself one thing. She stepped outside. The night air was cooler than expected. The street, brighter. Alive in a way it hadn't been before. And there it was. The neon table. Lights spilling onto the pavement. Voices overlapping. Energy impossible to ignore. Margot's gaze held steady. Analytical. Controlled. Then the door across the street opened. Julian stepped out like he had timed it. For a second, neither of them moved. Distance remained, just a road between them, but it felt like something far more deliberate. Years collapsed into that silence. He looked exactly like she remembered. Maybe sharper. More certain. She looked exactly like he expected. Unshaken. Untouchable. Julian crossed the street first. No hesitation. Of course not. Margot didn't step back. They stopped within reach, close enough to speak without raising their voices. No reservation, he asked, tone light, but precise. Not interested, she replied. A pause. Not empty. Measured. His gaze flicked briefly toward her restaurant, then back to her. Still protecting the past? Her expression didn't change. Still hiding behind spectacle? There it was. Clean. Immediate. No wasted movement. Julian let out a quiet breath that almost resembled a laugh. Good. You didn't change. Neither did you, she said. But something in the way she said it carried more weight than the words themselves. Not dismissal. Recognition. Another pause. Longer this time. Not hostility. Not entirely. Something unfinished. Julian stepped back first. We'll see how long that holds. Margot didn't respond. He turned, heading back toward the neon-lit entrance without looking over his shoulder. She watched him go for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. Then she turned away as well. Back into control. Back into silence. But the balance was gone. 2 kitchens. 2 philosophies. 1 street. And neither of them willing to yield. The first real shift didn't come gradually. It came all at once. Margot noticed it before anyone said a word. The rhythm of the dining room changed. Not empty. Never empty. But uneven. Tables that once booked weeks in advance now had gaps. Small ones. Strategic ones. The kind that didn't destroy a business overnight, but warned you it could. Walk-in canceled. The host said quietly near the end of service. Reason? Margot asked without looking up. They said they found something more interesting. Margot placed the finishing garnish on the plate with the same precision as always. Understood. No reaction. No visible response. But she didn't ask which place. She already knew. Across the street. Julian didn't wait for reputation to build. He accelerated it. Opening week turned into an event. Not by chance, by design. Limited seating, exaggerated demand, controlled access. People weren't just booking tables, they were chasing them. Every night felt like something exclusive, something temporary, something you could miss if you hesitated. And then came the move that crossed the line. Late afternoon, the quiet hour before dinner service. A delivery arrived at Leritage. Not unusual, except it wasn't for them. The box was sleek, black, minimal. No branding, just a small neon tag tied to the handle. Inside, a single-plated dessert. Perfectly preserved, like it had been transported in a controlled environment. Margot didn't touch it at first. She studied it. Composition precise, but not traditional. Flavor pairing aggressive. Intentional contrast. A message, not a gift. Her sous chef shifted uncomfortably. Should I remove it? No, Margot picked up a fork. 1 controlled motion. 1 measured taste. Silence. Sweet, then sharp. Balanced, but pushing too far on purpose. It demanded attention instead of earning it. She placed the fork down. He's compensating. For what? For needing to be noticed. The room stayed quiet for a second longer than usual. Then she turned back to the pass. We don't respond. But Julian wasn't finished. That evening, right before peak service, it started. Notifications. One after another. Local food bloggers, every major account in the district, posting simultaneously. Stories, videos, live reactions. All from one place. The neon table. Not just coverage. Coordination. A single phrase repeated across posts. One night only tasting experience. Off-menu creations inspired by culinary rivalry. Rivalry. Margot didn't need to open a single post to understand the implication. He wasn't just attracting attention. He was framing the narrative, turning their history into his marketing. And people responded exactly how he expected. By the time service hit full capacity, the street outside was louder than it had been on opening night. Inside Leritage, everything stayed controlled, but pressure built in quieter ways. A regular guest, someone who had never missed a Friday reservation, hesitated before ordering. I've heard interesting things across the street, he said carefully. Margot met his gaze, calm, unreadable. Then you should try it. Not defensive, not dismissive. A statement of confidence. But the damage wasn't in losing one guest. It was in planting doubt in all of them. Service ended later than usual, not because of volume, but because precision slowed under pressure. Tiny delays, small recalibrations, nothing visible to customers, but everything visible to her. When the last table cleared, Margot didn't stay inside. This time, she didn't wait. She crossed the street. The line outside the neon table was still there, even after closing hours. People waiting, hoping, negotiating for a chance to get in. She didn't stop. She walked straight past them. The staff at the entrance hesitated, but only for a second before recognizing her. No one blocked her path. No one dared. Inside, the energy hadn't faded. It lingered in the air. Heat, noise, movement that hadn't fully settled. Julian was at the bar, reviewing something on a tablet. He looked up before she spoke. Of course he did. "Margot," he said, like he had been expecting her. She didn't return the greeting. "You're using my name." Not directly. That's worse. A pause. Not hostile, sharp. Focused. Julian set the tablet aside. It's effective. So is theft, if you're not caught. That landed. Not loudly, but precisely. For the first time, his expression shifted. Not to anger. To interest. "You think this is theft? I think you needed a shortcut." Silence stretched between them. The kind that didn't fade, it tightened. Julian stepped closer, just enough to remove distance without breaking it completely. "No, I think I finally stopped waiting." "For what?" "For you to decide what this is." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "There is no this." "Exactly," he said. That was the strike. Clean. Direct. Margot held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. Measuring. Re-evaluating. Then she stepped back. Not retreating, ending the exchange. "Keep your audience," she said. "But stay out of my kitchen." Julian's voice followed her before she could turn away. "Then don't come into mine." She stopped, just for a fraction of a second, then continued walking. No response. No final word. The door closed behind her, cutting off the noise instantly. Outside, the street felt different now. Not divided, but claimed. Lines had been drawn. Not officially, not publicly, but clearly. And this time, neither of them would pretend it was anything less than war. War didn't start with explosions. It started with adjustments. Margot changed nothing publicly. The menu remained intact. The standards didn't shift. To anyone watching from the outside, L'Heritage held its ground without reaction. But inside, everything tightened. "Supplier confirmed?" she asked before the morning briefing even finished. "Yes, chef." "Confirmed or promised?" A pause. "Confirmed." "Good. No substitutions." That was new. Not the demand, but the insistence behind it. Because the first strike came at the market. The early hours, before sunrise, belonged to chefs who understood that quality didn't arrive, it was secured. Margot had built relationships here for years. Quiet ones. Reliable ones. No theatrics, no bidding wars. Just consistency. Until that morning. "You're out," the fish supplier said, not meeting her eyes. Margot didn't react immediately. "Out of stock." "Reserved." "For who?" He hesitated. That was answer enough. She didn't argue. Didn't push. She simply moved on to the next stall. Then the next. Each time, just slightly too late. Not a coincidence. Across the market, Julian stood at a distance that was far enough to avoid confrontation, but close enough to be seen. He wasn't speaking. He didn't need to. The results spoke for him. Margot approached him directly this time. No hesitation. "You're buying excess," she said. "I'm buying certainty," Julian replied. "You're creating instability. I'm adapting faster than you." Clean. Efficient. No wasted words. Around them, the market continued like nothing unusual was happening. But every vendor was watching without looking. Every transaction suddenly carried weight beyond price. Margot stepped closer. "This doesn't scale." Julian tilted his head slightly. "Neither does playing safe." A pause. Not emotional, strategic. Then she turned and left without another word. Because he was right about one thing. This wasn't sustainable, which meant it was temporary. And temporary tactics could be countered. By midday, the next front opened. Food bloggers. Not random coverage this time. Targeted attention. Julian dominated the noise. Flash, unpredictability, constant movement. His dishes were built to be filmed, shared, reacted to. Every plate told a story that lasted just long enough to go viral. Margot didn't compete on volume. She chose precision. 3 invitations. Not public. Direct. Only to the most respected voices, the ones who didn't chase trends, but defined them. When they arrived at L'Heritage, there were no cameras waiting. No spectacle. Just silence, control, and a menu that didn't explain itself. Tonight, Margot said simply, "You don't document. You experience." One of them raised an eyebrow. "No coverage?" "Not during." Another pause. "This one different." Curious. Then they agreed. Because exclusivity didn't always need noise. Sometimes it needed restraint. Across the street, Julian heard about it within the hour. 3 of them are offline, his manager said. No posts. No updates. Julian didn't look up from the dish he was adjusting. Good. Good. He finally glanced toward the window, toward the quiet building opposite him. She's playing properly now. That wasn't frustration in his voice. It was recognition. The next few days settled into a pattern. Not routine. Pressure. Supplies shifted unpredictably. One day Margot secured everything before sunrise. The next, Julian redirected shipments before they arrived. Bloggers split attention, half chasing spectacle, half drawn to discipline. Customers began choosing sides without realizing it. And in between all of it, the collision started. Not planned, not avoided. Inevitable. A narrow street behind the restaurants. Late evening. Deliveries finished. Staff gone. Margot stepped out to clear her head for exactly 2 minutes. No more. Julian was already there, leaning against the wall like he had nowhere else to be. "You're predictable," he said without looking at her. "You're inefficient," she replied. Silence. Then, unexpectedly, "You adjusted the reduction time," he added. That made her pause. Just slightly. "You noticed?" "I tasted it." "A beat." "It's better," he said. Not a compliment. A fact. Margot studied him for a moment. "You're overcompensating with acidity." Julian let out a quiet breath. "It's intentional. It's excessive." Another pause. Then, almost at the same time, "It works," he said. "It doesn't," she replied. They stopped, looked at each other, and for a brief second, the tension shifted. Not gone, redirected. Because this wasn't just competition. It was understanding. Unspoken, precise, unavoidable. "You could have done more," Julian said after a moment. "So could you," Margot answered. Neither elaborated. They didn't need to. That was the problem. They saw too much. Another silence settled, but this one wasn't sharp. It lingered. Then Margot straightened. "This changes nothing." Julian nodded once. "Of course not." But neither of them moved immediately. Because for a fraction of a second, the war paused. Not ended. Not resolved. Just recognized. Then footsteps approached from the main street. The moment broke instantly. Margot turned first, heading back inside without another word. Julian remained where he was for a second longer, watching the space she left behind. Then he pushed off the wall and disappeared in the opposite direction. The next day, everything resumed. Faster. Sharper. No hesitation left. Because now they understood exactly what they were up against. Not just a competitor. An equal. The shift didn't announce itself loudly. It didn't need to. It arrived in the form of a reservation. One name. No special requests. No entourage. No confirmation calls. Just Elias Vane. Margot saw it on the system before service. She read it once, then again, slower. Not because she didn't understand, but because she knew exactly what it meant. "Cancel?" her manager asked quietly. Margot shook her head. "We don't refuse guests." But the room changed instantly. Not visibly. Not for the diners. For the staff. Every movement sharpened. Every detail carried more weight than before. Because Elias Vane didn't write reviews. He defined outcomes. A single article from him didn't increase bookings. It redirected the entire market. Restaurants didn't recover from his criticism. They disappeared. Across the street, Julian got the same notification 10 minutes later. He didn't react immediately. He finished adjusting the plating in front of him, wiped the edge of the dish, then set it down with controlled precision. "Confirmed?" he asked. "Yes." Julian nodded once. "Good." Not relief. Not concern. Opportunity. By evening, the information spread without anyone officially confirming it. Staff whispered. Suppliers adjusted tone. Even regular guests sensed something without knowing why. 2 restaurants. 1 critic. The result will be definitive. No names mentioned. None needed. Margot read it once. Then closed the screen. "What does it mean?" her manager asked. "It means," she said calmly, "we are no longer competing locally." Across the street, Julian leaned back slightly after reading the same line. A slow breath. Finally, he said, because this was no longer about customers, or attention, or reputation within one district. This was escalation. Structured, public, irreversible. Elias Vane hadn't chosen a favorite. He had created a battlefield. And now every move, every plate, every decision, every risk would be measured against a single outcome. Win or disappear. The disruption didn't look dramatic at first. No alarms. No visible failure. Just absence. Margot noticed it during prep. The crate that should have been there wasn't. She checked the list once. Then again. No mistake. No delay notification. Just a missing delivery that should have arrived hours ago. Call the supplier, she said. They're not responding. Secondary. Same. A pause. Controlled, but tight. What's the status on reserves? Not enough for full service. That was the problem. Not shortage. Insufficiency under pressure. Because tonight wasn't a normal night. A charity dinner. High profile. Pre-announced. Non-negotiable attendance from people who didn't accept failure as an option. Across the street, the same realization hit within minutes. Julian stood in front of an open refrigeration unit, staring at the gap where a key ingredient should have been. Delayed, he asked. No delivery confirmed at all. He closed the door slowly. Check alternates. Already did. Nothing available in the city. Not coincidence. Not timing. Interference. Julian exhaled once, sharp. Not frustration, calculation. Because the variable wasn't just the missing supply. It was who else was affected. He stepped outside without another word. At the exact same time, Margot did the same. They met in the middle of the street. No hesitation this time. No pretense. You too, Julian said. Same supplier chain? Yes. A brief silence. Not tension, alignment. Targeted, Margot concluded. Julian nodded once. Of course it is. They didn't need to say his name. Elias Vane didn't disrupt directly. He created conditions where failure revealed itself. Tonight wasn't about taste. It was about pressure. We cancel. One of Margot's staff called from behind her. No, she said immediately. At the same time, we adjust the menu, someone suggested behind Julian. No, he replied. Their answers landed in sync. Another pause. Then Margot spoke first. We don't have enough individually. Julian held her gaze. But combined, neither finished the sentence. Because it was obvious. Unacceptable. Necessary. Temporary, Margot said. Controlled, Julian added. Off record. No visibility. Terms set. No negotiation needed. They turned at the same time. Clear one kitchen, Margot ordered. Shut down front service for 2 hours, Julian instructed. Within minutes, both teams were in motion, confused, resistant, but following direction. Because neither of them explained. They didn't have time to. The chosen space wasn't Leritage. It wasn't the neon table. It was the neutral ground between them. A secondary prep kitchen used for overflow, storage, rarely for actual service. Now it became the center of everything. Ingredients were moved first. What little they had, combined, recalculated, restructured into something viable. Then came the harder part. People. 2 teams. 2 systems. 2 completely different philosophies forced into one confined space. Station assignments, Margot said, already reorganizing the layout. No, Julian cut in. Flow first. Then stations. She didn't look at him. That wastes time. It prevents collision. A beat. Then, fine, she said. Not agreement. Adjustment. They moved fast after that. Not smoothly, but efficiently. Instructions overlapped, clashed, then aligned. His team pushed pace. Hers enforced precision. At first, it didn't fit. Then it started to. Because the goal wasn't perfection. It was survival without compromise. Hours compressed into minutes. Heat built. Noise rose. Pressure sharpened every decision. And in the middle of it, they stopped arguing. Not because they agreed. Because they understood exactly where the other would adjust. You're cutting too early, Margot said once, passing behind him. It needs to breathe, Julian replied without turning. Not that much. A pause. Then he adjusted. Slightly. Later. You're holding the reduction too long, he said. It stabilizes the base. It dulls the contrast. A beat. Then she adjusted. Just enough. No acknowledgement. No discussion. Just correction. By the time service began, the result wasn't either of their styles. It was something else. Structured, but unpredictable. Controlled, but alive. The guests never knew. They saw one seamless experience. One unified execution. No cracks. No hesitation. Exactly what they expected. Exactly what couldn't have happened alone. Service ended without incident. No failure. No exposure. The system held. Barely. After the last plate left, after the final guest walked out, the kitchen didn't celebrate. It went quiet. Not from exhaustion. From realization. Staff began clearing without speaking. No one asked questions. No one commented on what just happened. Because they felt it. This wasn't normal. And it couldn't be repeated. One by one they left. Until only 2 people remained. Margot stood near the prep counter, arms crossed, gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Julian leaned back against the opposite surface, silent for once. The noise was gone. The pressure remained. You adjusted mid-service, he said finally. You forced it, she replied. A pause. Then, it worked, he added. Margot didn't answer immediately. Because that was the problem. Yes, she said. Silence again. Longer this time. Not sharp. Not defensive. Something else. Recognition without conflict. We don't do this again, she said eventually. Julian nodded. No. But neither of them moved to leave. Because for the first time since this started, there was no opposition in the room. No audience. No performance. Just the result. Shared. Unavoidable. And far more dangerous than the war outside. The city went quiet long before they did. By the time the last staff member left, the building felt different, emptied of noise, stripped of performance. What remained wasn't a kitchen under pressure. It was space. Neutral. Unclaimed. Margot stayed where she was, reviewing what no longer needed reviewing. Inventory lists already memorized. Adjustments already made. There was nothing left to fix. Julian noticed. He didn't interrupt immediately. You're still correcting something that's already over, he said finally. Margot didn't look up. I'm making sure it doesn't repeat. It won't. That made her pause. Slightly. You're certain? Yes. A beat. Because next time, we won't agree. That landed exactly as intended. Margot closed the notebook in front of her. Slowly. Deliberately. We didn't agree this time. Julian pushed off the counter. No. We adapted. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It held. For once, there was no next move waiting behind it. No immediate conflict to resolve. Just the aftermath. Margot moved first, stepping toward the central station. Not to leave. To reset. She reached for ingredients that hadn't been used. Small quantities. Irrelevant to service. Julian watched for a second. What are you doing? Cooking. That's over. For them, she said. A pause. Then, for us, it isn't. He didn't answer. He just stepped closer. Not invited. Not stopped. What's the goal, he asked. Margot glanced at the ingredients. Then back at him. No goal. That's inefficient. It's honest. That was new. Julian's expression shifted, not into a smile, not into skepticism. Into focus. Fine, he said. Then no rules. Wrong, Margot replied immediately. There are always rules. Not tonight. She held his gaze for a second. Measuring. Then, minimal rules, she corrected. Agreement. Not spoken. Established. Margot reached for a marrow bone, her knife scoring the surface with clinical precision to expose the richness within. Julian, watching her, didn't reach for a traditional garnish. Instead, he grabbed a handful of sea buckthorn and a torch, the sharp, acidic scent of charred berries immediately cutting through the heavy aroma of the roasting bone. They started without assigning roles. No stations. No hierarchy. Just movement. Margot began with structure, building a base, something stable, controlled. Ingredients measured without hesitation, technique precise even without an audience. Julian interrupted it almost immediately. Not destructively, deliberately. Adding contrast where it wasn't expected. Pushing the balance further than she would allow. You're breaking it, she said. I'm testing it, he replied. It won't hold. Then we adjust. No argument followed. Because this time, neither of them was defending anything. They were exploring. The pace changed. Slower, but sharper. Every addition carried intent. Every correction came without explanation. At one point, their hands moved at the same time, reaching for the same component. They stopped. Just for a second. Too close. Margot withdrew first. Not abruptly. Controlled. You hesitate, Julian said quietly. I calculate, she corrected. That costs time. It prevents mistakes. A pause. Then, not all mistakes matter, he said. Margot looked at him then. Directly. Fully. That's where you're wrong. And that's where you limit yourself. The tension shifted again. Not into conflict. Into something tighter. More personal. Because this wasn't about the dish anymore. It was about control. Risk. The line between them. They continued working, but closer now. Not intentionally. Not avoided. Heat from the stove. Silence from the room. Focus narrowing everything else out. Try it, Julian said, sliding the spoon toward her. Margot didn't take it immediately. She watched him instead. Then the dish. Then back to him. Why? Because you won't trust it otherwise. That was accurate. She took the spoon. One controlled taste. A pause. Her reaction didn't show, but something changed in her eyes. Slight. Immediate. It's unstable, she said. But, another pause. Not wrong. Julian exhaled once. Not relief. Confirmation. Your turn, she said, already adjusting the composition. He watched this time. Closely. Because what she did next wasn't correction. It was refinement. She didn't remove his risk. She anchored it. Tightened the structure just enough to hold the contrast without killing it. Julian tasted it. Silence. Then, you're controlling it too much, he said. And you're not controlling it enough. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, they both adjusted at the same time. No discussion. No conflict. Just alignment. The final version wasn't his. It wasn't hers. It held both. Balanced in a way neither of them would have reached alone. They stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Neither speaking. Because now the problem was clear. Not the dish. Each other. You felt that, Julian said quietly. Margot didn't answer immediately. Yes, she said finally. Not denial. Not deflection. Acknowledgement. Silence settled again. But this time, it didn't hold distance. It closed it. Julian stepped closer. Not sudden. Not forced. Margot didn't step back. You don't like losing control, he said. I don't lose it, she replied. Not completely. A beat. Not yet, he added. That was the moment. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Inevitable. Margot's response wasn't verbal. She closed the distance herself. The contact was brief at first. Testing. Then it wasn't. No hesitation left. No calculation strong enough to stop it. Because this wasn't about the war outside. It wasn't about the critic. It wasn't even about the restaurants. It was the one variable neither of them had controlled. And now it was undeniable. When it ended, it didn't break the tension. It changed it. Sharper. More dangerous. Margot stepped back first this time. Not retreating, resetting. This doesn't change anything, she said. Julian nodded once. No. But neither of them believed it. Because they both understood exactly what just happened. Not a mistake. A consequence. And unlike everything else in this war, this was something they couldn't outmaneuver. The calm after the night shift didn't last. Not even 24 hours later, the first strike landed. Elias Vane didn't appear in person. He didn't need to. The weapon was information, curated, precise, manipulative. Margot saw it first. An anonymous message slipped under her door in the early morning. Carefully crafted to look like a concern from an insider. Did you notice the similarities between your signature dishes and someone else's new menu? You might want to check before it spreads. Her stomach sank instantly. Recognition, not disbelief. She had spent years building her reputation, her techniques, her standards. The idea that someone could suggest she was compromised hit like poison. She read the note again, tracing the faint watermark in the corner. Professional, clean, deliberate. She didn't call Julian. Not yet. Across the street, Julian received his own message. Unlike Margot's, it was explicit. We could accelerate your rise internationally, but the cost is a review that would destroy her. He stared at it for a long moment. Not shocked. Not tempted. Angry, but measured. He understood the calculus instantly. He didn't just delete the message. He forwarded it to a contact in cybersecurity, a regular at the bar who owed him a favor, asking for a trace on the routing headers. If Vane wanted to play with digital shadows, Julian would ensure those shadows had a source. Elias Vane had trapped them both, but in different ways. Margot didn't just feel anger. She felt the familiar, cold comfort of a wall sliding back into place. She traced the letters of the note, looking for a reason to dismiss it. But her mind, trained to find flaws, began to re-examine every smile Julian had offered as if it were a miscalculated seasoning. She didn't want to believe the paper, but she was terrified of the alternative, that she had let her guard down for a predator who knew exactly where she was weakest. Could she trust anything he did? Julian didn't follow. He didn't need to. He knew that whatever bridge had existed, for now, she had burned it. And Elias Vane had done exactly what he intended. He had created doubt, tension, and division without ever stepping into the room himself. By the evening, both restaurants were back in combat mode, not together, but apart. Margot pushed her staff harder than ever, not speaking to Julian, ignoring his messages, even as he tried to warn her about Elias's strategy. Every plate sent out, every adjustment in service, every minor interaction became a battlefield. Not the battlefield of ingredients or critics, but of trust. And somewhere in the shadows, Elias Vane watched, his plan unfolding perfectly. He didn't just want a review. He wanted them divided, emotionally compromised, vulnerable. Only then would his judgment carry the weight he intended. Margot, angry and suspicious, and Julian, restrained and furious, were walking straight into his trap, exactly where he wanted them. The tension between them was no longer about the street or the menus. It was about the fear that the only person who truly understood their craft had been the one to weaponize it. For the first time since the war began, the fight wasn't just professional. It was personal. The day passed in a blur of cold efficiency. At the market, the usual nods from vendors felt like interrogations. In the kitchens, every dash of salt was measured with a hand that wanted to shake but didn't. Margot and Julian moved in parallel orbits, separated by a street that now felt like a canyon of silence. They weren't just prepping food, they were prepping for an execution. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, the air between the two restaurants was thick with the ozone of an approaching storm. There was no more room for doubt, only for the service. The city seemed to hold its breath as evening approached, casting long shadows across the streets and wrapping both L'Heritage and the neon table in a quiet tension that pressed against the walls of every kitchen. Margot moved with familiar precision, yet each motion, each seasoning, each careful adjustment carried a weight beyond the immediate task. The thought of Elias Vane's impending visit hovered over her, a constant pressure that made the familiar rhythms of service feel like a battlefield. Julian, across the street, mirrored her focus, his team moving with practiced efficiency, yet his attention was divided between the execution of his dishes and the precarious state of his connection with Margot. Every glance in her direction, every subtle gesture, every brief communication was loaded with potential consequence. The critics' expectations, the city's attention, the stakes of professional reputation and personal pride, all coalesced into a singular moment that neither chef could escape. Preparations for the dinner were exhaustive. Fresh ingredients inspected, sauces meticulously balanced, plating rehearsed to perfection. Every detail mattered, and yet the invisible pressure of Elias Vane's influence infiltrated even the smallest choices, twisting perception and magnifying doubt. When the critic arrived, his presence was immediate and suffocating, a force that made the air itself seem heavier. Elias moved between the two restaurants with calculated observation, taking notes, asking questions, all the while unaware that the drama unfolding behind the scenes was far more intense than any culinary display. Margot felt the weight of his gaze, the scrutiny of every dish, and the lingering suspicion that Julian might once again act in secret, even though she had no evidence. Julian waited until the main course was served, the exact moment Vane's influence was at its peak. He didn't just approach the table. He brought a printed log of the deleted metadata from the anonymous emails, traced back to the critic's own private server, a tip-off from a tech-savvy regular who valued Julian's risks over Vane's rules. A critic's job is to observe the plate, Elias, Julian said, his voice carrying through the sudden silence of the room, not to poison the larder before the doors even open. He dropped the stack of papers next to the silver cutlery, the physical weight of the evidence echoing louder than any protest. Margot, watching from the pass, felt the weight of her doubt finally break. Dinner continued, each plate now carrying an additional layer of significance. Every flavor, every presentation, every gesture became a statement of truth, of authenticity, of resilience. Guests, unaware of the full extent of the drama, appreciated only the excellence of the cuisine, yet behind the scenes, Margot and Julian navigated the complex terrain of professional vindication and personal reconciliation. By the final course, the weight of the evening had lifted slightly, replaced by a tenuous sense of accomplishment. The critic, unable to control the narrative as he had planned, departed with a measured expression, his power diminished, his influence checked by the very talent he sought to manipulate. In the quiet aftermath, Margot and Julian shared a fleeting, private moment of acknowledgement, a recognition that despite the chaos, despite doubt and manipulation, their skills, their trust, and their connection had endured. The battle was over, not with a surrender, but with the demonstration of integrity and the affirmation of their shared passion for the craft. Though the night was far from simple, and the road ahead remained filled with challenges, they had survived the ultimate test, proving that skill, honesty, and mutual respect could withstand even the most calculated attempts to divide them, leaving them poised to face whatever came next with strength and clarity. The city had quieted, the evening air carrying the faint aroma of distant kitchens and the soft murmur of streets settling into night. Margot closed the doors of L'Heritage behind her, the glow from the interior lighting fading as she stepped out, yet the echoes of the evening's tension still vibrated in her chest. Julian emerged from the neon table simultaneously, the two of them crossing the street in silence, the weight of recent events pressing upon them, yet their steps measured, deliberate, a mirror of the control they had maintained all night. They paused at the corner, the bustling city around them seeming irrelevant compared to the fragile equilibrium they had reclaimed. The battle with Elias Vane had ended. The critic's influence had been exposed and diminished, leaving the two chefs standing amidst the quiet aftermath of vindication and exhausted relief. Neither spoke immediately, each processing the evening, the unspoken acknowledgement of what had been risked and preserved, the trust that had been tested and restored, however tentatively. Finally, Julian broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "We survived tonight. Not just the food, but everything else too." Margot nodded, her eyes reflecting the fatigue, the lingering doubt, and the cautious hope that had begun to take root. "Yes," she replied, her tone carrying a mix of relief and lingering tension. "We did." They walked away from the neon and the history, finding a small, nameless cafe 3 blocks over where the coffee was average and no one cared who they were. Eventually, they arrived at a small, unassuming cafe, its lights soft, its interior intimate, far removed from the glare of professional ambition and the harsh judgment of critics. Here, there was no audience, no competition, no expectation beyond the simple act of sharing a meal together. They sat across from each other, menus set aside, dishes ordered casually, not for presentation or acclaim, but for sustenance and the quiet pleasure of shared experience. Conversation flowed naturally, first about food, then about the day, the challenges, the fears, and the triumphs, until words about dishes became words about choices, about hopes, about what might come next. It was a moment of recalibration, a space in which the relentless drive of their professional lives could be paused, where the underlying connection they had cultivated could breathe without constraint. They laughed, shared observations, and for the first time in weeks, the tension lifted entirely, leaving room for warmth, for trust, for a cautious optimism that had been nearly buried under doubt and manipulation. The city outside carried on, indifferent, yet within the small cafe, a different rhythm prevailed, one of quiet reflection and the tentative shaping of a future together. In that space, Margot and Julian began to discuss not just the next challenge in their kitchens, but the possibility of collaboration beyond rivalry. A future where passion for craft and respect for one another could coexist, where competition did not exclude connection, and where love could be acknowledged alongside ambition. By the time the evening waned, the cafe emptied around them, leaving only the two of them and the comfortable silence that comes from understanding and shared experience. They stepped out into the night, the war behind them replaced by a quiet, shared exhaustion. The bond hadn't just survived. It had been stripped of everything unnecessary, leaving only the heat and the salt. They didn't reach for a shared vision of a grand empire. Instead, as the coffee grew cold, Julian reached across the table, his thumb tracing the faint calluses on Margot's hand. Marks of the same trade, the same obsession. No neons tomorrow? He asked softly. Margot finally let a real smile break the line of her mouth. Just the salt and the heat, Julian. Everything else is just noise. They stepped out into the night, not as rivals or partners in business, but as two people who had finally found the only other person in the city who knew exactly how much the perfect service cost.